Hello and welcome to Manor Hill Productions Live. Thanks for logging in. Before we get to our guests today, let's do the Manor Hill Industry Spotlight, where we recognize our customers and other industry partners who are making noteworthy contributions to the industry and sometimes the world. This week, during the COVID-19 pandemic and the nationwide shutdown, let's take a moment to celebrate the American Trucking Association and the nation's 3 million truck drivers who are working overtime to keep the critical supply chain moving. So when you see a full shelf at the grocery store, or for that matter, an empty shelf, remember, there is no shelter at home for the truck drivers who are scrambling to fill those shelves as fast as they can. These drivers are out there pumping gas, dousing themselves in hand sanitizer, and missing their families to keep the country supplied with the essential items we need. So thank you, truck driving men and women and the American Trucking Association that is supporting their members during this worldwide emergency. Okay, on with the show. As you watch our live stream today, note the comment bubble in the upper left-hand corner of the window, and please use it anytime during the webcast to submit questions and feedback, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions at the end of the show as we have time for. Thanks very much. If you're watching this webinar, you likely have some involvement with the live event industry, so you know what a multi-layered, frequently complex endeavor that can be. One part of a live event is the general session, and that can be a pretty big deal, but as I said, it's only one piece of the entire puzzle, and it can often take a back seat to other elements, the trade show, the awards dinner, the Saturday night entertainment. So let's give the general session its due today and talk about some things you can do to ensure the success of the general session. Joining us today is Hollis Johnson, a meeting professional who has a lot of experience with live events and general sessions from both the client side and the production side. Hollis is a skilled show director and has been asked to get involved in almost every facet of a general session, from PowerPoint development to stage management to show producer. So she knows what she's talking about. Hollis, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Bill. Hi, everyone.
So is it true? Does the general session really get the short shrift? Because from my perspective, that's usually the thing that I'm asked to work on. So for me, it's a big deal. But as you say, it can often get disrespected.
Well, I think it depends on the organization. There are some places that have whole teams that work just on the general session. That's pretty rare. And in other instances, the general session is such a small part of the large event that it's run by a number of people, and there is no one person really in charge of the room, no one person through whom all of the information channels to the production company and to other people involved. So it really depends on how big your show is and what the particular organization has set up.
Okay, so over the years, you've developed some of your best practices, and everyone else does too. Everyone has their own way of doing things, but hey, if it's to be a bigger world and a better world, let's all share our knowledge. So let's have you share your screen. Good segue.
All right.
And we'll get on with some of your notes. I'm looking forward to hearing what you got to say.
So for a lot of our listeners today, most of whom I would expect are meeting planners, but some of the people on the program today are from the content and the program side of things. So what I'm doing in this presentation is I'm just giving a perspective of someone who's been on both sides of it. I started my career on the client side, so sitting in the position of a lot of our listeners, and was involved in the planning from start to execution. I was also responsible for the executing of the general session. And so I learned over the years some of the things that you need to do at the start in order to make what you have to do at the end easier and more efficient. So I would imagine that most of our listeners today are meeting planners, and meeting planners tend to think of these types of events, and especially general session, in terms of space, food, signage, all really important things. And I'm so glad that they're willing to do that, because that's a part of it that I really don't like to do. But from the stage director viewpoint, which is where I'm sitting now, I have to look at it in terms of the program, the people, and the content. So our first part of this, our program is about to begin. We're going to focus on the planning. And what I would emphasize here is that those of you who are not the meeting planners, pay attention to this part, because this part is important in what's going to happen for you at the end. If this is done well in the beginning, what's going to happen to you on site is going to be a lot easier. So I start with this quote. All right, so this is a great quote. Every minute you spend planning saves you 10 minutes in execution. This gives you a 1,000% return on energy.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me when I tell you this is very true. So the planning part of this is very important. So let's start at the beginning. What's our purpose? Why are we doing this general session?
That's a good question, and it might seem a little obvious. Of course, we all know why we're doing this, but sometimes it's good to put that question out there and let everyone discuss it, because I have a client who, for years, they just packed the general session with a lot of, to my mind, boring stuff, tedious business, and housekeeping, and the whole general session, sort of the kickoff of the whole event, was just this kind of business stuff. And then they came to us and said, gee, the general session is not very fun. And we said, well, so what is this really supposed to be a business meeting or more of a pep rally? What's the goal of the general session? And they said, well, we come to think of it, we would like it to be more like a pep rally. And so that was great. That was just a real epiphany for everyone, which allowed us to start looking at all the pieces that had been jammed into it and start moving some of those to other events and open it up for a little bit more rah and fun. So yeah, I'm sorry to, well, so why are we doing this? Like I said, might seem like, an obvious question, but it is good to ask that question and discuss it. And that gives you a real clear direction for everything you do from that point forward. So thanks. Sorry for the interruption. Back to your presentation.
That's okay. So the reasons for having a general session vary from client to client, but overall, they're going to fall into either one or more of these categories. First, to inform, sharing statistics, giving a state of the business address, acknowledging awardees. To inspire, which would be to give a vision for the future of the business, tell stories from the field, or perhaps have a keynote speaker whose experience really resonates with your audience. And lastly, to entertain. Sometimes this takes the form of actual entertainment, what we think of dancers, a band, a magician, something of that nature. But it also can mean the way we present a message, our use of dynamics, using storytelling to get our point across. In essence, all of this is to communicate. So once we understand what it is we're trying to communicate, what's next? As with all creative endeavors, we need to begin with an idea or a concept. So you need to consider, is this a sales event highlighting achievements of your top sales performers, or a company-wide event to announce big changes? These two ideas would require a somewhat different approach, and the concept may lead to a theme for the overall event. So we need to consider, how is the general session connected to the entire event, or is it? Sometimes the general session is often a relatively small part of the overall event. So it's high profile for your VIPs and an opportunity for them to communicate to a large audience. So take time to consider the theme. And next, who is your audience? And what is the key takeaway you want from this event? Remember, this is for them, not for the people on the stage. So go back to your answer to the question, why are we doing this? To help define the takeaway and also to steer the content development. Now, once we've identified our concept, or the what, it's important to identify the who. Sometimes the general session doesn't have a specific person assigned to it, as I said at the beginning. Instead, it's a mix of staff from a variety of departments, and they're all working on different aspects of it. Speeches, speaker support, awards, all that kind of thing. And communication between them can be really challenging. Details about what actually needs to happen get lost. So it's important to get a solid team identified as having responsibility for the GS. Let's start with the key decision makers. This is the person or the people who approve everything that goes on in the GS. For a corporate event, it usually depends on which line of business is hosting the meeting. Sales meeting, marketing event, something of that nature. For an association or a nonprofit group, it's generally the president or the CEO. They lead the team that will develop the content and identify the presenters. Included in this group is the project manager. This would be the single point of contact for the rest of the general session team throughout the whole project. Everything that happens in that room goes through them. Content manager, presenter coordinator, and on-site contact or room coordinator. The content manager is a position that's very often overlooked, but it's really important as the project moves forward. They'll collect and organize all of the scripts, PowerPoint presentations, the videos, the music, anything that will be seen or heard in the general session. Next, ideally, there would be someone who serves as the contact for all the presenters. They would communicate all of the logistical information, arrival date, travel information, including hotel, specific rehearsal information, and what their deadlines are for confirming participation and for getting their content in. And lastly, the on-site contact or room coordinator. Now, very often, and in most cases, the project manager is the on-site contact. But if that's not the case, then someone within the organization really needs to be in the room as our client contact.
And Hollis, if I can jump in, while these are all important roles, I'm just going to focus for now on just mentioning the content manager, because that is a very important person, because a lot of times everyone, the video team is making stuff, the PowerPoint presenter or producer is creating PowerPoint, someone's writing scripts. Early on, it really needs to be established that that person, the content manager, has a lot of power and really needs to be acquiesced to. And because a lot of times, you know, people just, oh, I'm making my own videos, I'm making the PowerPoints, I don't have to report to that person. Well, you do, in a sense that it's all funneling through that person, and that person is in charge of making sure that the correct version of everything gets on the screen and into the teleprompter. And so many times, I don't know how many times, you know, we've been in rehearsal or during show and somebody goes, that's not the right PowerPoint version. Well, so trust the content manager and respect them. From my perspective, I just want to throw that in for all the content managers out there. So yeah, that's, like I said, these are all important people. That one in particular tends to get overlooked sometimes. So love your content manager.
Right.
Please continue.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. And you'll see in the second part of the session, you'll see where this becomes really important if you don't see it already. And this is one of the positions that I rarely see in shows. Things are coming from all of the people you just mentioned, and version control is non-existent, and it gets pretty crazy. So yeah, these three positions, and especially content manager, are really important. And I should also mention that in most cases, and I think the people listening in here will agree, in most cases, the project manager is the person who does all of this, and it's really too much work for one person. So in an ideal situation, and maybe we are in a place right now where we have time to think about our next meeting and how we want to organize our next meeting and organize the planning. Now might be the perfect time to start thinking about who these people need to be and convincing the powers that be that you need them. Okay, so next up. In addition, of course, to your in-house team, you'll have your production partner, and the account executive will be the lead, and all of the initial conversations will take place with them. They oversee the event from the production side of things, and they manage the budget. They're the main point of contact with the rest of the production team, and working with them are the production manager and the stage director. The production manager is the person who handles all of the equipment and labor for the general session, as well as creates the production schedule. They manage the load in and load out and troubleshoot all equipment related issues. They're in charge of the general session room during setup and teardown. And for most smaller meetings, the production manager may also have the role of stage director. This is the person who directs everything that happens on the stage and screens. And they're in charge of the crew between the end of load in and the start of load out. In pre-production, they'll take the run of show that you've created and create a show flow for the crew that will include all of the technical elements of the program, all the audio, the graphics, the video, all that stuff that the content manager has collected. Also, any furniture moves in case you have panel discussions, things like that. Anything that happens on the stage. They'll work with you to run rehearsals and to run the show. And finally, A crucial member of the team, whether you have an in-house department or an external vendor, is your creative partner, whose job it is to design all of the theme graphics, printed materials, and they may also be the team that creates all of the visuals for your general session. Now, once you have identified your team, that's your general session team, regular communication with them is really important. This may seem obvious, but it often doesn't happen. So to keep the general session team up to date and on track, schedule regular meetings to make sure deadlines are met, changes are communicated, and to keep things moving forward within budget. Now, these can be in the form of conference calls or video conferencing or in-person meetings. Next is communication with your presenters. And I can't tell you how often this does not go well. Presenters, whether they're the VIP in the office next to you or a celebrity on the speaker circuit, need to know what their deadlines are and a phone and email contact of whoever is managing them. For on-site, they also need to know where to go, what time to be there, who will meet them, all of those logistics. It's also important to do a periodic check-in with your venue contact, and this is often coordinated with your production manager on the production team. This just keeps you aware of any changes that might happen from the time the contract has been signed to the actual show dates. Things like room changes or dock availability, anything that might affect your plan or your timeline. And finally, keep everybody updated about the changes. We aren't always aware of how a change in one area affects another. So if you keep everybody in the loop, it'll raise any red flags that you might not even be aware of. So with the teams in place, communication ongoing, the next step is to develop the look and feel of what the general session room is going to be like. This begins with a review of the physical environment that has been contracted and understanding how that affects timing and budget. Here's some key factors to consider when doing that. And later you'll see how much they impact the time we need on site. First, the venue. What's the size and configuration of the room? Is it square, long and narrow? Are there pillars or other sightline issues? Are there chandeliers hanging? What's the ceiling height? These will determine the options you have for stage and screen size and height, where they'll be placed in the room, and what options you have for seating. Next, load in, load out. This is determined by the venue contract for the space, the budget, and the load out schedule of whoever has the room prior to you. These things are critical in deciding how complex your stage and scenic can be, and therefore how much time it will take for setting up and tearing down. At the front end, this will determine how soon the on-site rehearsals can be scheduled, and on the back end, it'll dictate how quickly you'll be out of the room so the next group can load in. Next is a set design. As I just said, the more time you have for load in, the more complex you can be. There are many choices here. Is there a hard set? How big is the stage? And how many people have to fit on it? Will there be a podium or a lectern? Does there need to be room for a teleprompter? Do you have panel discussions that need furniture to be moved on and off the stage? How big are your screens? Do you need access from backstage? And is there enough room to have a backstage green room? All of these factors influence the final set design, which again is dependent on the room size and configuration and how many people need to fit in there. And to keep it all moving forward on site, the production schedule is created by the production manager. This will be based on what we've just talked about, and it will include the amount of time and labor needed, open time slots for reviews, technical rehearsals for your crew, and presenter rehearsals, meal and bathroom breaks, and load out. Your project manager or presenter coordinator will fill in the presenter rehearsal details, who rehearses when, into those open time slots created in the production schedule.
Yeah, Hollis, those are all good points. And I want to go back to something you said earlier about staying in touch with the venue, because you might not think, you know, once it's all set up and you're clear on what's going to happen to the venue, then it's locked in and you can move forward. But it's good to check in with them once in a while, because sometimes, you know, you say, okay, we're still loading out on a certain date and we have this much time. And then they go, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, we booked that room. So now instead of a full day to tear it down, you really have half a day. I don't know, that happens. You wouldn't think it would, but it does. So as you said, communication is really important. Things like staying in touch with the venue, and just don't assume that nothing's changed since the last time you talked to somebody.
Right. And don't assume that they're going to talk to you, that they're going to call you and tell you.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
It just depends on the venue, but don't assume that either. So being proactive and staying in touch with them, and your production manager will be doing the same thing. So I think working together with your production manager will help ensure that you know exactly what to expect when you're on site.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Very good.
So we have content being developed. We have presenters being contacted, room logistics known, and the stage and set design underway, all being worked on by various groups of people. So how do we keep it moving? The one thing none of us can make more of is time, and everything takes time. Creating a timeline so that the team members can look ahead and work towards meeting their deadlines will really help. When creating a timeline, work backwards from the event date because that's finite. It's not going to change. I find a number of weeks out format works well so I can give start and end dates to items based on how long it will take to complete them. Remember to include any holidays or other events that may impact your timeline, and that'll help it keep moving forward. I know I forget the minor holidays sometimes when I'm doing this. Everybody remembers Thanksgiving and Christmas, but you know, I tend not to remember things like people's vacations, and other small holidays. So just keep all that in mind.
Arbor Day.
Oh, but say that again, what?
Arbor Day.
Arbor Day, right. I never remember Arbor Day. Exactly. Okay. Next is setting deadlines for both approvals and content completion. The approval process by the key decision makers always depends on their schedule. So getting these dates on their calendars early will help keep everything moving forward. Also, periodically updating your presenters on how far out it is from their content deadline will help make sure they get their stuff in on time. Everybody's busy, and most presenters appreciate the reminders. Also, just a quick note here about approvals. Remember, there's a time between when you give something to someone to approve and when they get back to you. And if there needs to be discussion about, well, they like part of it, but they don't like another part. So make sure you build enough time in your timeline for that to happen. Don't expect that you're going to give something to someone to approve, and then 2 days later, you're going to have it approved, because that really works. That would be a nice thing, but it really works. Identify milestones. Those are the tasks that, if are not completed by that date, will stall the entire process. For instance, if the deadline to approve the final budget is missed, very little can move forward without knowing costs. And finally, share the timeline. Very important. Lots of things can happen to disrupt it, and if everyone involved has a copy of it, they can let you know of possible interruptions. It's also a really good tool to use to help set agendas for conference calls or video conferences or in-person meetings. Most, if not all, of what we talked about so far can be also applied to planning and organizing almost anything. Some of our listeners are doing some of these things already, and most, if not all, are doing them for the overall event planning, but maybe not specifically for the general session. So let's look at some elements specific to the general session. Once presentation topics and the presenters have been finalized, it's time to start putting the program together. We begin with the duration of each session. This can be anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours, although 3 hours is a long time to expect your audience to sit in rapt attention, especially in the morning after they've had some coffee. So then within that time allotment, we need to think about how long is each segment. Speeches, slides, videos, award ceremonies, Q&A, announcements, all that stuff. Once all of this is established, the next step is to create a run of show, otherwise referred to as an agenda, a show flow, program. This defines your general session sequence of events. What and who goes when and how long it takes. With a run of show in place, let's look at what media is likely to be included. Like any event, a play, music concert, sporting event, lecture, the materials used to support the presenter can enhance the experience for the audience and bring a topic to life. The more senses that are involved, the better retention of the material. Presentations can be as simple as somebody walking the stage and talking to the audience, whether they have a script or not. Most of the time, however, presenters have visual support in the form of slides, which we refer to as graphics, and some video. In the case of a product launch, there may be live demos of a product, and very often there is some kind of awards segment, whether that's incorporated into an existing session or a session on its own. If we use our run of show, for example, for our first GS, that means we have an opening video, 3 individual presentations, and a 3-person panel discussion, which may have slides from each of the panelists. Plus, each of those presenters may have a video or videos they want played at some point during their presentation. As you can see, the amount of media or content that needs to be organized starts to add up. In part 2 of this session, we'll talk through what needs to be communicated to the people creating this media, how it needs to be handed over to the production team, recommendations for rehearsals, and finally, how it all comes together.
Okay, good, great. Thanks, Hollis. So that's a lot of information, and that's only part 1. So part 2, we're looking forward to more helpful hints, great tips, best practices. We did have some questions come in that have to do with some of the things you talked about. So let me refer to those. Actually, we got 2 or 3 of these. At what point do you need to schedule rehearsals?
Very good question. If you think back to the circle diagram that showed the venue, the load-in schedule, all of that actually should be known pretty early, because those contracts are generally signed way out in front. I worked for a company one time that had contracts 7 years out. They knew where they were going and what their contract said 7 years out. So the actual time that you're going to have in the space is already known. Then once the program is put together, you know who your presenters are, you know what the subject matter is and how much time everybody gets, you'll be able to get a sense of how much rehearsal time you're going to need. So when the initial contact with the presenter happens and you give the date that they're being asked to present, included in that information should be, and rehearsals will most likely happen the day before. So you don't have to give specific information right then because you're not going to know then. The specific information will come later once the production schedule gets put together, once the actual run of show is completed and everybody understands how long it's going to take to load the set in, all of that. But you'll at least be able to give the presenters that initial information so they can schedule their travel accordingly. Now, a little note here about that, and I'll reiterate this next week. This is the ideal. Ideally, we want to be able to rehearse everybody the day before their actual presentation. It all depends on budget, not only the organization's budget, but perhaps the budget of the presenters if they're coming in from the outside. And generally people are, because your event is in a town, not where they live. So there's a lot of factors to work into that, but the short answer to your question is as soon as possible, set the rehearsal schedule.
Yeah, and I'd say you're right, as soon as possible, lock it down and announce that to everyone, because how many times has this happened? You're getting ready for rehearsals and somebody goes, oh, well, the CEO can't come to rehearsal because he's going to the founders dinner or the welcome happy hour or whatever. So he's all right, he knows what he's doing. And so the sooner you can lock in, like, no, you can't schedule that mixer because there's a rehearsal at that time or whatever, but that just,
it's a big puzzle.
It's out of control.
Yeah, it's a big puzzle. There's a lot of different pieces. And as I said, the general session, while it might only be a small part of your entire meeting, it's the place where your VIPs are going to be in front of all of these people. And to give that short shrift is to put your VIPs at risk of fumbling around on the stage and not knowing what they're doing. And nobody wants to do that.
Right. Okay. Another question. Okay. If you don't have the luxury of a content manager, presenter coordinator, on-site room coordinator, all those roles you mentioned, as you said, this is best practices, but sometimes you don't have those. How do you cover those roles?
Well, generally, one of 2 things is going to happen. It's either going to fall all on the program manager's lap, or you'll have what is often the case, multiple people. You know, the marketing department the marketing department manager will have a presentation. So their people are working on that one. Then the CFO has a presentation. His people are working on that one. And, you know, they've also contracted an outside video producer. So an outside company is making a video for them. So it's scattered amongst all these people, which means once we're on site, it can be really chaotic because the information is coming in from all different people. Files are named all different kinds of things. And I'll get into file naming conventions in the next part of this series. It's a lot more stressful on site. So, I mean, reality is reality. If it's not in the budget or your organization doesn't agree that these things are needed, it's going to fall in somebody's lap. And I can tell you that when there isn't anybody within the organization handling it, it generally falls in my lap. So it just means that our time on site gets squeezed tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And you're just setting yourself up for things being late, mistakes being made. You know, again, what we do up front, we go back to that quote, 1 minute of planning is going to save us 10 minutes in execution.
Right. And also, when you're talking about those roles and the different people assigned to those roles, it's important to understand what that person's role is and what they're supposed to do, because it's almost like make sure you have those tasks covered even more than you have those positions covered. Because if you go, well, we don't have budget or time or people for this particular role, so we throw that out. Well, throw the person out, but don't throw out what they were supposed to do. Reassign what they were supposed to do to somebody and make sure that gets checked off the list. Don't just lose a task or lose an activity because you didn't have the person to do it. I know that goes without saying, or it should, but it happens. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, we got time for one more. Well, this is a tough one. This should be a 4-part series. We'll do a 4-part Netflix series on how do you deal with people, CEOs, and other people in authority who refuse to meet their deadlines. You can set a deadline. All speeches must be in on this date. That doesn't mean that morning all the speeches will be in.
Yeah, this is a problem more often not fixed. Here's what I can say about it. I think building your team at the beginning and getting a lot of buy-in to your plan is going to help this in the end. There's not too much you can do about a CEO who decides that they don't have to meet a deadline. I mean, unless you want to put your job at risk. But one of the things that is very important, whether we're talking about the program manager or the content manager or any of those roles, is that they have to be given, if they're being given the responsibility to handle all of that, they also need to be given the authority to enforce it. So if I'm the content manager and I've given you a deadline of, I don't know, whatever the date is, to get your PowerPoint presentation and any videos, anything that you're going to use into me, and you don't meet it, I have to have the authority from the people above me to go back to you and say, this is due now, it needs to get in now. And if they don't do it, then I also have to have the agreement by the people above me that I can go to them and say, I'm having a hard time getting things from this person. And I mean, I know it sounds like tattletaling, but it isn't. It's project management. It's making sure that you have what you need in order for them to look good on the stage and for us to be ready. I'll tell you, one of my pet peeves is if the crew is not ready when somebody walks in the door for their rehearsal. And the only time in my shows that crews are not ready is when we have not received the content on time. So again, when we get into the second half of this, you'll see how the decisions made in this phase of the project really impact what happens once we get on site, when time is limited and stress is high.
True. And this has probably happened to you a lot of times. It's happened to me. You ask for things and the deadline passes, and so you ask again and you ask again, and at a certain point you think, gee, I'm becoming a pest. They're about to get mad. And then you turn around and you go, well, we didn't have your speech in time. We didn't have the right version of the prompter. And they're like, well, you should have pushed harder. So it's like, I was pushing harder, you got mad at me. So
Right.
it's,
Yeah,
you know,
that's a
you got to take each incident, you know, case by case and make your own best decision. And hopefully you had a good ally within the organization who can be the heavy. But it's a, you know, it's a tough role.
right. It
So,
is. And I have to say, in my first job for this, and when I was the person in charge of both the planning and the execution, I was very lucky to have the senior leadership of the organization very supportive. And so if somebody didn't meet their deadline, and this is yet another reason to have those regular meetings with the key decision makers and the rest of the team. So that's basically your time to say, well, I've gotten this and this and this, and I'm missing this and this and this. So that keeps them in the loop during the process. And then I was lucky enough to have the people at the top, they got in touch with the people who didn't have their stuff in on time. And they said, you've missed your deadline, get it done. Now, that's a dream situation. Most of us are not in that situation. So, yeah, I'm always saying to my husband, if you think I'm nagging, it's because you didn't do what I asked you to do the first time I asked you. And now it's the fourth time I'm asking you, and whose fault is that? So, I mean, obviously you can't say that to a presenter, but yeah, it's a difficult position to be in. And, you know, you have to use your smarts and your wiles to do what you can. And hopefully you have the support of the people above you.
good. All right, great. Well, thank you, Hollis. And thank you for opening the door to sharing our pet peeves, as you did about people not being ready, because I have a lot of pet peeves. Most of them have nothing to do with this industry. It's just, you know, it's a long list. So anyway, thanks for being here. We look forward to part 2. Thanks everyone for logging in, and go to manorhill.com. That's manor-hill.com to register for upcoming webcasts, to view previously aired webcasts that are on demand on that website, manorhill.com, manor-hill.com. And just explore the entire world of Manor Hill Productions Live and see everything that they have to offer. So thanks again for logging in, and we'll see you next time on Manor Hill Productions Live. Thanks, Hollis.
Welcome.